What is going on, Diablo 2 fans? Dobrunsky here. In today's video, I'm going to be ranking all of the new builds that have been introduced in patch 2.4. So I want to give a quick little disclaimer here, is that everything that I've tested so far, it might be tweaked a little bit. They did update us that there will be one more phase of PTR testing where balance changes might be tweaked a little bit. But my gut tells me, based on how far they've kind of gone with changes, in particular with some builds, like the Summon Druid, for instance, I don't think that we're going to see any massive shifts either way, so I'm largely going to say that this tier list will be pretty accurate. And also, I'm only focusing on leveling and magic finding and grinding and hell difficulty. I don't really want to include a leveling up guide in this video. I mean, I could make a separate leveling up tier list. Let me know in the comment section below if that's something you guys would like to see. But some builds, for instance, like the Holy Fire Paladin, would be S tier for leveling and normal because they did buff up the damage. But then when it comes to hell difficulty, because of that little nerf that they threw in, Dragonin and Holy Fire Paladin, they're not really super viable. So that's why I kind of only want to focus on hell difficulty for this tier list. And again, I'm only going to focus on the new stuff. I'm not going to include Hammertons and that kind of thing because we already know where they kind of lie in terms of compared to other builds. So hopefully you guys enjoy this video. Again, a quick reminder before we jump in though, just want to let you guys know that I do stream twice a week on Twitch. So if you guys do enjoy my YouTube content, any follows on that platform would be very much appreciated. Got the link for my Twitch channel in the description below. That being said, guys, let's jump in. So this is my tier list, and for those that aren't really familiar with how they work, S is the very best possible setup, and then A, B, C, and D are progressively worse. So I'm going to start off with D tier and work my way up. And the first build that I'm going to mention is the Mage Necromancer. Now, I'm pretty sure that this is a build that people were really excited for, but the changes that they made, they just really did not pan out. Any Summon Necro in general, really, or for that matter, any Necro, Poison Necro, Bone Necro, or Summon Necro, they typically just try to get the first kill as quickly as possible, and then switch to Amp Damage, or they might use Amp Damage first, and then Corpse Explode. Poison Necro might go lower res, Poison Nova, then switch to Amp, but really, Corpse Explosion is the main damage dealer for Necro. But I think people were really hoping that with an Infinity Mercenary, and then casting lower res, that your mages would do substantial damage. Mercenary is obviously going to be the strongest, and then again, Corpse Explosion will clear up pretty much everything, but the mages do nothing. I tested this setup with, I think I had level 50 summoning skills, and I actually took Affinity off the Mercenary just so he wouldn't do any damage and tested how long it would take to kill stuff on Eldritch and Shank players 1. The mage damage is just not there. I guess they're really good meat shields, but then I would make the argument, why would you go the Mage Necro approach instead of just using regular summons and maybe revives? So again, in my humble opinion, the Mage Necro is D tier for hell difficulty. Might be a little bit better for leveling, but the fact that they buffed up bone damage for the Bone Necro, and that's already the best leveling spec, I highly doubt that mages are better for leveling. Again, let me know in the comment section below if I'm wrong on that, but pretty sure you guys will agree that the Mage Necro is a D tier build. So the next character that I want to talk about is the Warcry Barbarian. Now this could either be a D tier or S tier build depending on what you plan on actually doing with the Barb. So in terms of players 1 magic finding in the pits, a pit singer build, which is a very niche and expensive magic finding setup, I would argue that it is an S tier build in that scenario, and that's because they reduce the mana consumption and the damage is a little bit higher, and on players 1 boss sniping, it works really well. In my opinion, it's actually a little bit easier to use than a Pit Seeker build. Just in terms of like the gameplay, it's a little bit more forgiving. And to play max efficiency for a long time, I really do feel like the Warcry Barbarian is better for that. Now with that being said, in terms of like pure damage output, it's very, very bad. I tried a max damage setup in Chaos Sanctuary, and you're just better off running like a budget Frenzy Barbarian and clearing that way. So if you want a niche MF build, it could be S tier. But in terms of just pure damage output, if you wanted to focus only on Warcry, it's D tier in my opinion. Now, if they really wanted to increase the like quality of life of the skill, I think if they slowly increase the radius as you invested hard points, so maybe 20 hard points, you double the radius, I think in that scenario, people would use it more frequently. I kind of compare it to like if you're farming in the Chaos Sanctuary, killing stuff, like using Grim Ward. I was trying to mess around with that skill. It's very clunky to use. Someone in chat actually kind of described it as in the middle of a fight, stopping and trying to tie your shoelace, because that's what I was doing. I was like whirlwinding, trying to get a kill. Then I'd stop in the middle of the pack, try and cast Grim Ward, then go back to whirlwinding. So I feel like if they increase the radius on it, people would use it more frequently because it'd have better quality life and it would just be easier skill to use, because as it currently stands, I would only ever use it for players 1 magic finding or for Bale farming. And the only reason I think it works okay for farming Bale is you can actually sit where the waves are going to spawn and you can pre-cast it, and then they'll land in that Warcry and they'll be stunned. But its tiny radius makes it clunky to use in Chaos Sanctuary. And the final D tier build is the Rabies Druid. I've gone back and forth with some friends and other content creators. They seem to want to rate this build higher. I think it is really bad. The duration of poison damage is over a very long time, and you can mess around with really weird like D-web setups with 4 poison faceted shields and bramble, stuff like that. And it's okay for farming cows, but it's one of those builds like you want to have like all shape-changing skillers, D-web, poison facets to clear cows, maybe close to the same speed as a Javazon, because you have to kind of like herd them together, hit them with rabies, and then wait for it to spread and circle back, and then they're dead. So this might be the build for you if you want to be something different, invest a lot of wealth, and then farm players want cows. But I messed around with this build using very good gear in Chaos Sanctuary, and it's horrible. That's why it's a D tier build in my opinion. And again, let me know in the comment section below if you guys agree or disagree. I'm a big Druid guy, but I do not like the Rabies Druid at all. So moving on to the C tier builds, we're stepping up in clear speed a little bit. I rated the Summoning Druid as C tier. I know a lot of people wanted to just flat out give it a D tier, but hear me out. I think that this build is very close to reaching its full potential. Now, I do also want to note that someone suggested in the comment section below of my Shapeshifting Druid video that there is the possibility, which I didn't examine, but if I had melee gear on, and then all summoning skillers, casting a bunch of ravens, a bunch of direwolves, and then using like a shield ribcracker with fury. So supplementing like a little bit weaker standard fury damage, so maybe like 8,000 fury damage, with my summons just helping instead of taking a pure summoning approach. Now I'm gonna be honest, I did not test that. I do think that it would be okay. My gut tells me it would not be better than just full-on max damage attack rating, Grand Charms to Small Charms, and pure Fury focused, but that is a potential to take with the Summoning Druid. But overall, I think it's very close, and I think it only needs 2 changes in its current state, and I think it would be completely fine. The first is that I think you should be allowed to summon a group of Spirit Wolves and summon Grizzly, or summon a group of Dire Wolves and summon Grizzly. I don't think that you need to go all summon Dire Wolves, all summon Spirit Wolves, and summon Grizzly all at the same time with the Ravens. I think that's a little bit too much, but I think being able to choose 1 pack of wolves and a bear at the same time with ravens would help a lot. And I do also think that being able to cast both spirits at the same time, or just 2 out of the 3. There's that Thorn Spirit, which I actually did not try. They changed it so instead of reflecting back a percentage of damage, it reflects back flat damage. That could be an option to try, but I think that if you could cast Oak Sage and Heart of Wolverine at the same time, I think that that would bump up the Summoning Druid to B, or maybe edging on an A tier setup. And the advantages to that as well, being able to summon 2 spirits at the same time, is that I do truly think that the majority of summoning builds, the majority of shapeshifting builds like Fireclaw and Fury, they're very good, but they don't quite have that edge on a Paladin, because a Paladin has Fanaticism Aura and Paladin, has Holy Shield and Max Block, so it's a very tanky build and tons of damage. I think that if you could cast Oak Sage and Heart of Wolverine at the same time as a shapeshifter, that would kind of level the playing field a little bit as well. So that's basically what I have to say for the Summoning Druid. C tier, it's very close, and if you could just get that extra damage of being able to get the 2 summons or 2 packs of Wolf and Bear at the same time with Ravens, I think the build would be a lot better. It's very close. The devs did a good job of changing skill tree, but just please make us be able to cast those at the same time, and then it's totally fixed. So the next build that I want to cover is the Plague Javelin Amazon. Now, this is actually the only build on this list that I did not test, but I did watch other content creators, and I just think that it's not there. I know that they did make some quality of life improvements, like reducing the duration of poison damage, which decreasing the duration of poison damage over time is effectively increasing the damage quite a bit. But I did watch some videos where like they were fully decked out, Scalers, Torch, Annie, poison facets everywhere, chucking their javelins, spreading poison in cows, and then switching to D-Web. And the clear speed was okay, but it was not close to a Javazon, and I don't know why I would want to try and hunt for D-Web and poison facets to have a subpar Javazon, again, clearing cows, and then going back and forth between using D-Web on the main hand and offhand, not having CTA. I think that it's close, I think that it just needs more damage in my opinion. Poison is just such a weird skill. Like you can have 100,000 poison damage over like 30 seconds, but that just does not equate to being a lot of damage. So again, this is one that I would like to hear you guys' feedback. If you think I'm totally off, you think it's a B or A tier build, but based on what I saw other content creators and their testing, I absolutely will not be playing this build. And the final C tier build, that I want to cover is the normal Holy Fire Paladin. I was kind of debating about pushing this down to D tier after the nerf, but it is a solid leveling build, but this isn't spec'd around leveling. But I think that due to the buffed up damage that it has, and that you're actually translating fire damage to like your zeal as well, this build could be viable in some certain scenarios if you had all offensive aura GCs and Infinity Mercenary. You could probably run through Stony Tombs, the Icy Cellar, Ancient Tunnels, anywhere where there's not a lot of fire immunes, and you have an Infinity Mercenary. It's just a kind of a different, weaker spin on a Zealer or Zealot, but it could be a cool, interesting build. And it actually will maybe bring some value to offensive aura GCs. The only thing that makes me very sad is that they nerfed that scaling damage based on how close monsters were to you. I do understand that some people had gut reactions of thinking the Dragon was too powerful, but keeping that scaling damage would have been really cool, especially for some builds like Holy Freeze. We could have made it like a Freezed In more viable with that, so that scaling damage, it kind of being gone, sucks. But I do want to say that this is definitely S tier for leveling with a Paladin all the way through normal and into Nightmare now due to the increased damage. Yeah, that wraps up all the C tier, so now we'll jump into B tier. So there is a ton of B tier builds. I'm going to do my best to try and move through them as quickly as possible. I did make a reaction video to sort of my initial thoughts of PTR so far, and I did kind of want to stress the theme that I feel like the devs have identified a lot of the areas where certain builds are lacking, but I don't think they twisted the thrall enough in terms of changes, and that is why there is so many B tier builds. Now I have to admit, a lot of these were C tier before, and I guess they did move them to B tier, but it would have been nice to see a couple more A tier setups. Let's just jump into these. Let's rifle through them. Martial Arts Assassin variants. So I did test the Thunderclaw version as well as a Tiger Strike Dragon Tail setup. They did largely improve the mechanics of how martial arts tree works in terms of building up charges and then releasing them in different stages instead of prior to this patch update. Used to be if you built up to stage 3, you released a charge, all the stages were gone. Now you can go stage 3, stage 2, stage 1. And they did make it so that the finishing moves, they're guaranteed to hit to release a charge. So that is a large improvement. Two things though. First off, I don't feel like the damage is quite there. I did test them with like literally perfect gear, and they were okay, but I was expecting maybe a little bit more with something around like level 45 plus skills. The second is that just, and it's something that I don't think they can actually really fix, but I really do find the mechanics in the playstyle very clunky. Oftentimes with all the animations that are going on the screen, it's very hard to see the number of charges that you have and to appropriately release them. So I was basically just like spam left and right clicking and just hoping for the best with Death Sentry providing supplemental support. So they have largely improved these builds. I would maybe like to mess around with like God tier claw setup for Claws of Thunder, kind of revisit that because I did only use Bartux. So there is some potential there to make some cool stuff, as well as the Tiger Strike boss sniping was pretty insane. I think I had 70k with Dragon Tail, so some fun stuff there, but just the general gameplay, very clunky, and that's why I rated it B tier. And the Fire Trap Assassin, this is one that I think they should have gone a little bit further with the damage for Wake of Fire. I know that Wake of Fire has great AoE, but if you just compare it, like, I think it was level 45, I had 1600 fire damage, whereas you can stack like 4 or 5 lightning sentries on top of each other that do 1 to like 12 or 13 or 14k for that same similar amount of plus skills. And then both builds have Death Sentry exploding corpses, so I feel like they should have just gone a little bit further. Wake of Fire. Wake of Inferno is a super clunky skill and is really only good for boss farming in my opinion. Although with that being said, Fire Blast is really good, and then you do have the Shadow Discipline support like Fade or Burst of Speed or Cloak of Shadows or Mind Blast, depending on what you want to use, just to kind of help with crowd control. I think that the Fire Trap is a lot better because there's new areas to magic find with it, like the Icy Cellar, the Stony Tombs, a lot of areas that there's not a lot of fire immunes that are level 85. But I do feel like Wake of Fire needs a pretty decent buff. Like I would like to see maybe 2.5, 3k fire damage for a level 45 to 50 skill. Again, let me know in the comment section below if you guys agree or disagree. I do think it's largely improved, but If I had to pick between two trappers with perfect gear, I would definitely pick the lightning trap with Death Sentry every time. Now moving on to the Strafe Amazon. This is a build that I almost was going to put to A tier. Now, I know what you're saying. You're like, you know, dude, Boazon still suffers from the same problems. Like, you need insane perfect gear to have really good clear speed, and that is all true. But with Strafe starting at 100% damage, not starting at negative damage, and also with the dodge and evade and avoid skills being improved, this build was a lot of fun, and with perfect gear, it was actually mowing down players at Chaos, just proccing amp damage from Atmoscarab. I do think that for the Boazon, if they just slightly buffed the damage of Strafe and made multi-shot start at 100% damage too instead of 75, and make it so every arrow and multi-shot procs chance to hit, I think if you did those two things, Boazon could maybe be bordering on A tier with really good gear. Because if you think about that, shooting that massive ray of multi-shot, every single one having a chance to proc amp damage, or Strafe just doing more damage in general with the chance to proc and then not having the avoid dodge animations kind of interrupting you, I think it could be built a lot better. And they did change magic arrow so it converts more damage to magic, so that works really good for physical immunes. So some good improvements, but the Boazon, I just think, needs to be pushed a little bit further. It's still that build that needs insane perfect gear, and then even then it's okay, but it's not, it doesn't even touch like just Enigma, Hodo, Spirit, Shaco, Arax, Mage Fist, hammered in with no inventory. So they did make some improvements. I think I'd like to see it pushed a little bit further though. The Fire Druid, they did make some really big changes here, in particular with the cooldowns that are associated with each skill. So prior to this patch, if you were to cast Armageddon, you would literally be stuck not being able to cast another skill for 7 seconds. So those delays between each other are no longer a thing. So it's largely been improved. You can run around spamming Fissure, Volcano, and Molten Boulder with Armageddon. But I can't rate anything higher than A, because in any area where there's fire immunes, the physical damage is not enough to really make decent clear speed to get through. So you're kind of stuck focusing on just farming areas that have no fire immunes. And again, they have made some large improvements, but I would like to see the cooldown duration on Volcano knocked down to 1 second instead of 2, because I did find there was a couple scenarios where like I would cast a Fissure, cast a Volcano, and then I would spam some Molten Boulders and I want to go back to hit Volcano again, but I was still waiting on that cooldown a little bit. I would like to see that cooldown delay either completely removed or just at least reduced, because the damage output I think was like 2.5k fire, 2.5k physical at like level 45, so it's not like it would be ridiculously overpowered to have that with no cooldown. Also, Volcano is super sporadic. It is good damage, but just in general, if you were to compare like really good Fire Druid to a half-decent Fireball Sorceress, Fireball Sorceress is easier to play and would clear faster. So they did make some large improvements. I think that a tiny damage buff and then removing the cooldown of Volcano and then being able to cycle between all the skills would improve the build largely. And another thing that's kind of annoying with this build is there's an issue with next hit delay animation, and that's not really something that I think the devs can fix with patch updates, but basically if you're taking damage from a Volcano, then you can't take damage for a little bit from Fissure. So you can cast them on top of each other, it's just not optimal. But I found the gameplay kind of annoying, trying to be like, okay, I'm going to cast Fissure here, I'm going to cast Volcano here, and then I'm going to shoot a couple boulders while I'm trying to run around in close enough proximity for Armageddon to hit. So fun build, largely improved. I think if they got rid of the Volcano cooldown, that would largely fix setup, but it's definitely way better than what it was. Now the Fist of Heaven's Paladin, they made a lot of really good changes as well, like reducing the cooldown, making Holy Bolts pierce, and they did buff the damage a bit, I believe. I would just like to see Holy Bolts damage all type of monsters instead of only the undead, because in its current state, it's really just like an undead boss pack sniper or whatever if you just want to only focus on the undead. I was trying this out with like perfect gear in the Chaos Sanctuary. You're smoking through the undead, but then Infector is so slow. So maybe if you want to do like Chaos runs, only focusing on the Oblivion Knights and the Spirits, and then maybe doing Desace, Vizier, and just avoiding Infector and just doing runs like that, it could be cool. But just that kind of weird paradox of a level 30 skill largely being improved, but it still doesn't touch Blessed Hammer. So I would just like to see it, the Holy Bolts damage everything, and then I think the build's great. Dragon, Holy Fire Paladin, a little bit upset that this one got nerfed. The main reason being, we finally actually had an incentive to roll the rumored Dragon and Hand of Justice, because the only other time I'd ever used Dragon and Hand of Justice was with an Ordin setup, but it was really cool. You could rock Hand of Justice Phase Blade, Dragon Body Armor, Dragon Shield, super expensive, 3 Sirs, 3 Lows, and a Champion, for a build that actually was pretty good in areas where there was no fire runes. Now, it fell flat on its face against fire immunities. You couldn't like run Bale or Chaos Sanctuary, but you could run a whole bunch of cows. They did nerf the damage, and it's still viable, but I think they kicked it off of being like an A, almost bordering on S tier, back down to a B tier. We already have a ton of B tier builds. I made videos on this where I didn't think the nerf was justified. Again, you guys can let me know in the comment section below if you guys agree or disagree, but I would have left it the way it is, but unfortunately it's just a weaker version. You could still run it, but I don't think I would want to invest the wealth for something that would just be slower than a Zealot in its current state. Now, Leap Attack Barbarian. This skill is super fun to play, but it's kind of awkward to play. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, it's really fun. The animation is sped up, but I find it's just more of like a repositioning tool. So I would invest 1 point into it and maybe reposition and whirlwind around. Because if you just want to only focus jumping from boss to boss to boss, it is pretty slow. You could focus on champion packs only, but I mean like every monster. If you just jump from monster, 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 it does get a little bit slow and tedious. And especially if you jump the leap animation and then you miss and having to do it again. But the skill looks really cool, and it's great for repositioning if you don't have Enigma. So I do think it's been largely improved. The Throw Barbarian, I would almost rate this an A tier. The only thing that they need to do is address the quantity. They did actually address this. They did buff up the total quantity of weapons by I think about 50%. I have to double check. But I think they should add another skill or another attribute to the skill Throw Mastery that reduces like the chance of using throw quantity weapons. So maybe when it's completely maxed out, you have a 50% chance of not using a quantity, because the damage output was actually phenomenal. With the best gear, Players 8, it was just running over stuff. But waiting for your durability of your throwing weapons to replenish was awful. So they have addressed it, but I think if they just pushed it a little bit further, it would be better. Fury Druid and Bone Necro, not a lot to touch here. Fury Druid has always been good. You can now cast Hurricane in werewolf form, so that's really good. Although they only buff the attack rating. I know there is a lot of damage for Fury, but just the attack rating doesn't really change it too much. Werewolf has no defense. It's easy to get hit. A lot of damage, but it's a squishy build. So I do think, going back to my summoning druid point, if you could maybe cast 2 of the Oak Sage at the same time, you could buff that build a little bit. But not too much has changed there. I do really wish you could teleport in shapeshifting form though. It's the only build that can't teleport. There's a lot of cool stuff you could do with like Hurricane and Werewolf form if you could teleport, so please give us that ability. And the Bone Necro, nothing has really changed other than it got about a 500 or 600% damage buff on Bone Spear and Bone Spirit with the best possible gear. So I just don't think it's that much of a damage change. It's pretty negligible. And if anything, it made things worse for PvP. So Bone Necro stays at B tier for me. So moving on to the A tier builds, there's 4 here to cover, but I do want to add a quick correction to the Bone Necro. I meant that with the best possible gear, your Bone Spear or Bone Spirit receives about an additional 500 damage points. Not 500%. 500% would be an insane damage buff, but it's level 53. I think he went from like 5.7k Bone Spear to 6.2, so it's more damage, but not enough to make it noticeable in PvM, and then it destroys it in PvP. So don't think Bone Necro is anything higher than B tier. But starting off with the Nova Sorceress for A tier setup, they added a damage synergy. Static Field now adds extra damage to Nova, but also Thunderstorm receives a damage synergy from Static Field. So it's almost like the new reworked Lightning Tree. They meant for you to use a maxed out Thunderstorm with Nova, and it actually does decent damage, and it's great supplemental support. It's very aggressive, fun playstyle as well. So Lightning, you're kind of hanging back, shooting bolts. Nova, you're right up in monsters' faces. So very fun build and definitely A tier. I don't think it quite matches the clear speed of like dedicated Lightning Sorcerers for Bale runs, but it's definitely a solid build choice now. Next one is Hydra. Now, they did reduce the cooldown, or remove the cooldown on this skill, so you can cast up to 6 heads almost instantly depending on your FCR. So you get some great damage on boss sniping, but they did walk back some of the damage synergy buffs that they gave Hydra. I'm a little bit bummed on that, because if you only like vacuum focus on like really high-end gear farming Mephisto, you're like, oh yeah, that's a ton of damage, you just smoke the bosses, but that doesn't translate to PvM because monsters are split up. Hydras are shooting their individual firebolts at monsters. You don't get any AoE from like Fireball, so if you actually do like Stony Tomb clear speed with Hydra only, and then compare that to Fireball, Fireball is actually much faster. So I don't think the damage was justified, or the damage nerf was justified, but it is actually a solid choice for budget farming for Mo Tricky Mephisto. With a lower res one, it's actually quicker than Blizzard. So at least we have a new sorceress to play in held difficulty that's not Blizzard for kind of building yourself up. So that's why I rated an A tier build. The next one is the Fend Amazon. A lot of people might think this is a horrible choice, but in reality, you get a ton of damage, a really strong Valkyrie, and you have good survivability with the avoid, dodge, and evade animations. And this build is relatively cheap. Considering something like an ethereal Ethone Sedan with 3 shell runes, Duress or Fortitude, I know Fortitude's a low rune, Laying a Hand, String of Ears, Ravenfrost Ring, High Lords, G-Face, that is now a solid package. The most expensive gear would just be, past that, would be max damage, attack rating, plus life, grand charms, small charms, but Fend Amazon is close to a Zealot in my opinion. You don't have the block rate, but you do have the dodge, avoid, and evade, and solid damage now, and a massively buffed up increased attack speed. So I think it was 100% damage. They buffed it up from LOD. So it's a solid choice and actually works really well with budget gear, so that's why I rated it, an A tier build. The final one is the Fireclaw Druid. I really love what they did with this skill tree. They essentially opened up, I think it was 40 skill points. It used to have, I believe it was 4 synergies at 22% damage per level. They now reduced it to 2, but they buffed the overall base damage. So you have a lot of extra skill points that you can put into like Maul. So you have a build that does tons of fire damage. You can get a lot of extra physical damage now. And you have great crowd control with Shockwave and the Maul stun effect. So this is a very solid build that can get great damage, can now handle fire immunes. The only issue it struggles from is it doesn't have AoE, but honestly, every melee build minus like a Kixin with Stormlash or a Whirlwind Barbarian doesn't have AoE. So this is a solid A tier physical build. So we finally made it to the S tier level, and the only build that I'm giving this rank is the Berserk Barbarian. Now this build was already the #1 magic finding character if you only were focusing on trying to get like Tyrell's Might, due to the fact like just Pitzerker, item find, teleporting around, you could one-shot mobs, focus on champions or boss packs. It was the best MF build. They opened up the skill tree, so instead of Howl and Shout providing Berserk damage synergies, it's now Howl and Battle Orders. Shout was always a weird skill to add additional damage to Berserk, because when you swing Berserk, your defense goes down to 0. Shout boosts your damage. It was always like just wasted skill points kind of, but now with the fact that you can pump a bunch of points into Battle Orders after you have your item find in Berserk for extra damage, but you benefit from that extra plus life and mana. So I think it's a really, it always has been a really good build, and I think that change just made it a little bit better, so it's always going to be great for magic finding. I think there is the possibility for doing some really like high level targeted boss sniping using like Storm Shield for max block and just having an insane life pool, not really worrying about the defense. That's the only S tier build that I have. Again guys, let me know in the comment section below if you guys agree or disagree. I largely think that changes were positive. I just don't think they went enough with some of them, and I really do think that my tier list demonstrates that with the fact that we have 10 B tier builds and only 4 A tier and then 1 S tier. Everything doesn't have to be S tier, but why do we have to have a bunch of average builds with like level 40 to 50 plus skills that just don't really quite crack the meta? I don't know. That's how I feel about the patch notes and kind of the rankings so far. Again, please let me know in the comment section below if you guys agree or disagree, if you think I'm on crack, if you think the list was pretty good. I always do read the comments, just don't be a dick. Other than that, hope you guys enjoyed the video, and I'll catch you on the next video or live stream. Peace out.